It's wish you've always taken such charge.
You are listening
to the Border Chronicle.
Right when the book Border Hacker, A Tale of Treachery, Trafficking, and Two Friends on the Run was published in late April, authors Levi Vonk and Axel Kirchner began to receive threats. While this extraordinary and page-turning book, and mind you, this book really does read like a novel, is in one way about the unlikely friendship between an anthropologist from Georgia, Levi, and a deported computer hacker from New York City, Axel. And mind you, Axel arrived to New York City at the age of 1 after he was born in Guatemala. The book is also a work of high-quality, immersive journalism that goes right into the heart of not only Mexico's border enforcement apparatus, but also the infrastructure and power dynamics of the humanitarian network on the Mexican migrant trail. Levi Vonk talks about all of this in the following interview, from the threats to a quote-unquote shelter.
Whenever he picks migrants up or he has migrants sent to him, he locks them inside this auto shop and forces them to work on cars all day in exchange just for food.
And how he himself was detained there and how he helped engineer a plot to break out. But Border Hacker is also about something else. As Levi mentions in the interview, he formatted the book after a romance. And with this, he dives into the deep friendship and love that forms between him and Axel, which is a platonic one. Through the lens of this deep bond, he makes the strong and very persuasive argument of how necessary it is to fight for a better world. First, I just want to get started by just asking you, what was the motivation? What was the kind of seed that started this book project?
Sure, yeah. I didn't start out trying to write a book. I was a young guy. I was 24 years old. I had gone down to southern Mexico on a research grant because theoretically I was going to do an anthropological research project. I wasn't entirely sure what that was. I'd done some studying. And I ended up volunteering in a migrant shelter in southern Mexico at the beginning of 2015. And after volunteering there for about a month, 2 months, I was invited by the organizers of this thing called a migrant caravan, which at the time I had never heard of before. Almost no one had ever heard of it before. This is before Trump, before migrant caravans were in the news. And they said, yeah, we're all going to get together. It's going to be a bunch of Central American migrants, and we're going to march through immigration checkpoints. And the idea is to raise awareness about Central American migrant struggle, the fact that we're being attacked by gangs and cartels and exploited by police and immigration officials. Will you please come? And I said, okay, sure. And then suddenly I'm marching down the road. I'm charging through immigration checkpoints. I'm getting way more than I bargained for, right? But of course, at the time, it was also like a really eye-opening, politicizing experience for me. Marching along people who have fled for their lives, who've left everything behind. And I had this little recorder with me. So I just started doing interviews and recording these stories day after day, hearing these stories of the gangs are trying to kill me. My father's been disappeared. The mudslides have covered our home because the climate change is occurring in Guatemala and we can't farm our fields anymore. And in the midst of hearing all these stories, in the midst of organizing with people to try to actually do something about it, right, which to demand that the Mexican government acknowledge what is happening and try to give people documents, I met who would eventually become my co-author, Axel Kirchner, who at the time was a 37-year-old deportee from the United States. He'd been born in Guatemala during the Civil War, but he'd been brought to the U.S. when he was 1 year old. His mom brought him to the U.S. and he grew up in New York, and he's a real New Yorker. I mean, you hear his voice. Fortunately, we also got to record the audiobook together, so you can actually hear him read his own words in his voice, which is amazing. I just knew immediately something was different with this guy. This book happened because I met Axel, and I knew I wanted to work with him in some way. Again, I'd never written a book before. I didn't know how to write a book, but I knew that the person in front of me could so poignantly and beautifully and funnily explain their journey in a way that I hadn't always encountered with other migrants. And one of the things that I had been thinking about at the time was, why aren't more Americans paying attention to this immigration crisis? And because I'd read a lot of amazing books that go into real detail about the brutality that's happening in Mexico, in Central America, on the US-Mexico border, and yet it's so hard to get the American public to care in some sense. And one of the things that I thought might be different was that when you often tell immigrant stories, you have to do a twofold translation process. One is a linguistic translation from Spanish to English, but another one is cultural, right? Like you have to get an American to understand, maybe someone who grew up in this tiny little indigenous village in Guatemala, what that life is like, how they understand their journey, how they understand the violence that is inflicted upon them. And that's also a process of translation. But what I had with Axel, we could bypass some of that. He was speaking in English, and not just any kind of English, but really slangy, compelling New York English. And he was, for all intents and purposes, an American on the migrant trail. He knew less about Mexico than I did at the time. And I was learning a lot. I didn't know very much at the time either, but I was in the very awkward position of suddenly having to explain certain aspects of Mexico, like Day of the Dead to Axel and what that was. And so through that process and through our dialogue, we started thinking about doing some kind of project together, and eventually that became a book.
Did you meet Axel? So he was on the caravan, and did you meet him at a shelter?
Yeah, I met him on the caravan, and I met him in the small town of Chahuites, Oaxaca, where at the time the migrant activist Ireneo Mujica was running a migrant shelter, and so I met him there on the caravan, just outside the shelter one day. He had heard about the caravan. He'd heard about this thing that was happening. He didn't know what a migrant caravan was either. He had just been deported, and he heard, a bunch of migrants, hundreds of migrants are all organizing together and marching through checkpoints. So he thought in his mind, okay, if I can get there, maybe I can get safe passage through Mexico. So he was running through the jungle for days trying to catch up to us. And I was the first person, essentially, that he ran into as soon as he found the caravan.
What I've read in your book was just amazingly it reads like a fast-paced novel in a lot of ways, but it's not a novel. It's nonfiction, and with a host of characters and different power figures as well, right? They're playing different roles in what would make up a caravan, or what even makes up the whole kind of what we might call the migrant trail that starts oftentimes well before the US-Mexico border. Well, it's sometimes even before the Mexico-Guatemalan border. So actually I want to just ask you one question about that, because you do bring up the southern the what is it called? The Programa Frontera Sur.
The Southern Border Program.
The Southern Border Program.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Quite a bit. And really, that what I read in Border Hacker was just this kind of on the ground view of what that is, right? Is there
Yes.
Some insights you could give us on that, right? What is this program, and how, like, I often think that, thinking about the U.S., just the U.S.-Mexico border, when you think about border issues in the United States, you're not going far enough, right? It's like you have to go further. Like, there's layers to it, and a huge layer is this program. But could you give us some of the insights that you had from on the ground, on the caravan, and even beyond that with Axel?
Absolutely, yeah. And just a little side note, I'm actually in a PhD program, and my dissertation is on the Southern Border Program. So I have a lot to say about it. But the Southern Border Program started in 2014 under the Obama administration. It happened right after, you might remember, in the summer of 2014, there was we had the quote-unquote border crisis, in which approximately 70,000 unaccompanied minors crossed into the U.S. And the Democratic leadership at the time had a real dilemma on its hands. On the one hand, if it accepted all of these unaccompanied minors, Republicans would accuse them of of draining national resources, giving undocumented immigrants resources that American citizens should have, blah, 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 all those talking points we always hear. On the other hand, if they rejected all of these children, they would be perceived potentially as heartless by their own voting constituencies, right? And so what the Obama administration did was that they struck a secret pact with the Peña Nieto administration, which was he was the president in Mexico at the time. Well-known right-wing human rights abuser. He's most infamous in Mexico for massacring 43 students, or helping organize a massacre of 43 students in Mexico and then helping cover it up afterwards. So the Obama administration strikes the secret pact, the well-known human rights abuser, and says, at all costs, whatever you do, we will send you millions and millions of dollars every year. Just keep Central American migrants out of Mexico. Detain them, deport them, but keep them away from the US-Mexico border at all costs, and keep them out of the news cycle. And especially target women and children, because they're the ones who are going to be perceived as most sympathetic in the news cycle, right? So this happens in the summer of 2014. It takes a little while to get the funding together. It takes a little while to get everything passed. And I arrive in Mexico in January 2015, just as the Southern Border Program is really taking off. Again, it's secret at the time. Very few people know about it. I didn't know about it until I was on the ground. But all of a sudden, the whole landscape of Central American migration has changed. You suddenly see way, way, way more immigration officials all over Mexico. Immigration checkpoints popping up on the roads. It's militarized. They have all these brand new gleaming trucks with machine guns. There's rumors of night vision cameras and drones. And it literally feels like a war. And I'm working in the shelter in southern Mexico. And we have people wandering in states of severe dehydration. They've been beaten. Some of them have been left for dead by the police and immigration officials. People who now, to avoid these new immigration checkpoints, have trekked days and days and days through the jungles and the deserts without water or food. And these are areas that controlled by cartels, controlled by gangs where they can be attacked. And they'd stumble into our shelter, sometimes with the bottoms of their feet walked clean off. And I was shocked. And again, I'm a young guy. And I wasn't particularly naive about, the U.S. foreign policy often being very detrimental to other countries. And yet I was still just absolutely horrified at what I was seeing. And so when I heard about this migrant caravan, they were marching explicitly against the Southern Border Program as an attempt to try to raise awareness. Now, since then, that's early 2015. Since then, the Southern Border Program has continued in Mexico, but it doesn't have now, in the beginning, it actually had a central kind of leadership in Mexico. There was someone running it, there's an office, and within a year, they shut it all down because they were receiving a lot of criticism. So today, the program still continues, theoretically, but without the name, without the title, without the office, without anyone that you can supervise or complain to or say, we don't like this. But it's very, very much still happening today. And my goal is to try to uncover what is going on in Mexico and what the U.S. is actually funding. But the signs of it, you can already see signs of it everywhere. Even in the U.S. media, it might not be reported as the Southern Border Program, but when you see migrant caravans today clashing with police in Mexico, that's part of the Southern Border Program. All the money that goes into funding those police units, they're militarized. They look like they're an army. And literally now, Mexico has invented a new armed wing of the armed forces called the National Guard, which is literally an army that's only deployed to stop migrant caravans, more or less. That's funded by the U.S. through the Southern Border Program.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Thanks. Well, I personally I've looked into the Southern Border Program a bit myself. I went down there. And I was in southern Mexico in Chiapas and Arriaga, a place where you mentioned in your book.
Yes.
And in August of 2014. I mean, right when, like a month after. I remember a month. It was announced in July of 2014, right when the unaccompanied minors was making a lot of media and press in the United States. And then 2 days after, the U.S. Embassy issues this cable saying, "Congratulations, we've been helping you work on this. We've given you this and that
Yes.
and the other thing." So but it was so
Absolutely.
interesting because what everyone in Arriaga at that time was saying, because I went to the shelter there, they were saying that people were all around, around the train yard, and then everyone just kind of disappeared, right? All
Yeah.
so it's
Absolutely, yeah. People are no longer allowed to ride the trains in the same way. So yeah, that trying to kind of train culture and the way that you understood how to migrate through Mexico, all of that disappeared, and instead it became much more splintered and fractured and scary because you didn't know how to get through Mexico in the same way anymore.
yeah. So I want to so when thinking about that caravan, and it's interesting that it was not only a movement to the north, but it had a political message too that was looking directly at this southern border program. But also, you during that, you got a lot of insight into the inner structure of the caravan, like the different people that were
Yes.
working within it, the kind of, if I could say, power structure therein, right?
Sure. Hmm.
And from what I understand, I mean, I want to talk a little bit about some of the threats that you've been receiving since the book came out, but also how that
Yeah.
connects with the book. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, like, what were some of the
Hmm.
things that were revealed to you. Were there any like huge surprises for you in doing the caravan, of maybe like even figures that you respected that then you realized weren't all that, or were a lot different than you thought?
Yes. Absolutely. I had gone down to southern Mexico because at the time there's an incredibly famous priest. I always describe him, his name's Father Alejandro Solalinde. And I always describe him to American audiences. I say, think MLK, but if MLK was like a Catholic priest in Mexico, right? At the time, he was the biggest human rights figure in all of Mexico. He's still one of the biggest human rights figures today, celebrated in the New York Times, the LA Times, The Guardian. He was rumored to be longlisted for the Nobel Peace Prize. The biggest advocate for migrant rights in the country, if not in all of Latin America. And I said, I've got to go down and meet this guy. I've got to work for him. So I started working in his shelter. And not long after, I joined this migrant caravan. And the caravan, interestingly, at the time, Solalinde, this priest, the year before, he had organized another migrant caravan. At the time, it had been the biggest in Mexican history. It was about 1,000 people. And afterward, with the implementation of the Southern Border Program, the Mexican government said, never again. You don't get to do this anymore. And if you start another caravan, we're going to shut it down and we're going to deport everyone. So Olinda said, okay, I'm not going to do that this year then. Well, that didn't sit very well with other activists in southern Mexico, one of which, his name is Irineo Mujica, and he has since grown in fame. If you ever hear about a migrant caravan in the US, almost guaranteed that Irineo has organized it in Mexico. But this was the first caravan that he really truly organized on his own, and it was the first migrant caravan that had ever been organized without a priest. Before, it was always religious, and priests, powerful priests in the area, could help organize migrants and negotiate safe passage with immigration officials and police. Well, Irenaeus said, screw that. Solalinde isn't doing his job. I'm going to do it instead. So he organized Mexico's first secular migrant caravan, and it set the tone for all other caravans since. So this caravan, exactly what you've already seen in the media. We gather up hundreds of migrants. We march through these checkpoints. But soon enough, we got word that the caravan was being surrounded by immigration officials because we no longer had a priest to kind of negotiate our passage through Mexico. At that point, Ireneo started acting very irrational. He was no longer very clear with us about what we were going to do, who he was talking to. And eventually Solalinde was called back in to kind of rescue this caravan. And I thought at the time, oh, thank goodness. Like, finally, we have this good guy. Ireneo was an unknown guy. He seemed really irrational. I didn't really get his whole deal. And I was like, oh, this wonderful human rights celebrated priest is going to come in and save the day. Well, fortunately, eventually, long story short, we get into much greater detail in the book, but Solalinde was able to not keep everyone from being deported. And the caravan eventually made it to Mexico City. But along the way, I started to see things that didn't add up. One of the things was that one night I walked into Ireneo's bedroom in his shelter in Chahuites, which at the time, again, his shelter was under the umbrella organization of Father Sololinde's humanitarian network. So this is a shelter sponsored by Sololinde, funded by Sololinde, has Sololinde's name out in front. And I walked into Ireneo's bedroom, and he was sitting semi-naked on his bed with a 12-year-old boy on his lap. Both of them were just in their underwear, and he had his hand on the boy's lower stomach. And when I walked into the room, I was shocked. I didn't really know what to do. I'd gone in just to grab my backpack quick. And Ireneo got up and without a word kind of pushed me out of the door and closed the door behind me. And it was so shocking, and there were threats of us being deported at the time, and it was just one more thing, and it didn't really compute in my head at the time. But later on with Axel, once I met up with Axel, we started hearing other things going on in Sololinde's network. We started hearing about that the person who ran the day-to-day of the shelter operations in Sololinde's own headquarters, his name was Beto Donis, was having sex with women migrants in exchange for favors, in exchange for help with their documents, better sleeping quarters, things that you think, if you're an incredibly vulnerable person, you probably don't actually have much of an option to say no. Then another one of Axel's travel companions, a young migrant who I get into the book, his name is Lalo, he was also received unwanted sexual advances from Ireneo Mujica. And then to top it all off, the biggest thing of all was that Axel, at one point in his journey, had busted his knee and he was unable to migrate. And I made calls to various people to try to get him to Mexico City where I could hopefully get him documents or something like that. Well, Axel, and this is something we actually haven't discussed yet, right? But it's a big part of the book. Axel is no ordinary migrant. He is a computer hacker. When I met Axel on the migrant caravan, we had been surrounded by immigration officials. And they were threatening us with deportation, and Father Sololinde was trying to negotiate our safe passage. While that was happening, suddenly the Wi-Fi signal cut out, all of our cell phones weren't working, and Axel realized, hey, I think they're jamming, the police are jamming the signal. Probably, we assumed, because they were about to rush in and detain everyone, and they didn't want anyone to be able to call for help. And I thought, oh my God, this is it. I'm here in southern Mexico, I can't call my family, I can't let them know that this is gonna happen, I'm gonna be detained, we're all gonna be detained, what's going on? Axel rushes away, and he tells me after the fact, I don't know this at the time, but he runs into shelter headquarters where Father Sololinde is, and he says, I need a computer, give me a computer. They give him a computer. Axel is able to hack around the police jammer and get just enough cell phone signal for Sololinde and his team to make the calls they need to the capital, Mexico City, talk with the politicians they need to talk to, and send for backup and send for help. We end up not being detained because Axel can hack around this police jammer. But because of that, Sololinde and some of these other activists see what Axel is suddenly capable of, and they take note. So later on in Axel's journey after the caravan, when he gets stuck traveling and he busts his knee and he asks me for help, I call around, and this other activist in Sololinde's network, who says he runs a shelter in Mexico City, his name is Armando Vilchis, he says, I can pick Axel up, not a problem. Well, long story short, he picked Axel up and he takes him back to his quote-unquote shelter, but it's not so much of a shelter.
And Axel was he picked him up where in was he in southern Mexico?
He was in southern Mexico. He picks him up in southern Mexico, out actually in Chahuites, Oaxaca, where Ireneo Mujica is running his shelter, and brings him back to this small town called Metepec, which is essentially a suburb outside of the city of Toluca, which is a couple hours outside of Mexico City. He says he's running a shelter, but we find out it's not a shelter at all. Armando Vilchis by day is an auto mechanic, and he has an auto shop, but he's outfitted this auto shop in such a way that it has tall chain link fences with barbed wire. And whenever he picks migrants up or he has migrants sent to him, he locks them inside this auto shop and forces them to work on cars all day in exchange just for food. This is an open air auto shop. It's outdoors. Migrants have to live in broken down cars. And if they don't work, they don't eat. And they're not allowed to leave. And suddenly I thought, oh my God, I've gotten Axel enslaved, right? Because this is what it is. He's being forced to work all day long just for food. And of course, for Axel, he wasn't just working on cars like the rest of the migrants. He was being forced to hack Mexican government officials on behalf of Armando Vilches. And I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? Again, this is a man who is working still today under Father Solalinde's humanitarian network, which in Spanish is called Hermanos en el Camino, or Brothers on the Path, or Brothers on the Road in English. So yeah, we ended up completely by accident, had no intention of doing this, but stumbling into a real scandal, human rights scandal happening in Mexico that no one is talking about. And we've been trying to raise the alarm ever since.
Has there been any sort of thing written about it or any sort of documentation of Armando's so-called shelter that's really a mechanic shop? I imagine like right now there are probably people staying there, living in the cars, locked in.
Almost certainly, yeah. Almost certainly right now there are about a dozen migrants in that shop. He receives semi-regular coverage in Mexican media, small outlets normally, about this, and it baffles me because it's framed as humanitarian. And you see these people living in absolute poverty. They don't have adequate plumbing in this place. There's no hot water. The shower didn't work when I was there because I lived there as well to try to help break Axel out.
Well, you were locked. Were you technically locked in there?
I was locked in. So I actually, when Axel was kidnapped by Armando Vilches, because that's what it was, I thought, what am I going to do? I can't call the police because I could get everyone deported. And Armando had already told all the other migrants in there, including Axel, that don't try to call the police because I know the police, right? And so I thought, well, what am I going to do? The only thing I can do is go there myself and try to formulate some kind of breakout plan. So I called Armando up. Axel and I had all these schemes. We talked to each other on the phone late at night. How are we going to do this? What do I do? When do I show up? And eventually I said, these schemes are becoming so wild and elaborate, they don't make any sense. I'm just going to call the guy up. So I called him up and I said, hey, I've worked for Solalinde in this network. I marched on the caravan. Like, I know a lot of your friends. And Axel tells me that you're taking really good care of him. I'm an anthropologist. I work with migrants. I would love to come live at the shop, help out how I can. And I don't know why, but he said yes. I have two suspicions, neither of which I can confirm, but one of which I think Armando thought he could maybe get some money out of me because he often uses migrants to collect donations. And that maybe he, in his own way, actually has convinced himself that he's helping people. He would often say, well, if I wasn't giving them shelter, they'd be out on the streets, right? And so I stayed for about 10 days in this shelter, documenting what was happening. I interviewed all the migrants, I took pictures, I talked with Axel, and we began formulating a breakout plan. And what we decided to do was that Armando had a son who was about my age, who was a party boy, and he lived in an apartment that was attached to the auto shop. And eventually what I was able to do was to convince him to have a party at his apartment. And while he was kind of getting ready for it, he was running in to go shower, I was able to more or less distract him so that he forgot to lock the gate of the auto shop back up. So we were all waiting.
This is right out of a movie, I tell you.
I can still see it now so vividly in my mind. He closes the gate behind him, and normally they always lock the gate, but at that moment he's so excited to party with me, I guess, that he forgets, and we're still chatting, and I'm looking at the gate. I'm thinking it's unlocked. And he says, okay, I'm gonna take a shower, man, don't worry, like, and soon I call the girls and I've blah blah blah. And I'm just thinking, okay, whatever, just keep your eyes on me, don't look back at that gate. And he goes into his apartment, and his bathroom, there's a window that looks out onto the auto shop, so we could see the bathroom light flick on and then hear the sound of the running water. And as soon as that happened, I said, go now. And Axel and I and about 12 other migrants were able to break out of the shop finally, hop on a bus, and make it back to Mexico City. So yeah, it was a crazy time. I didn't tell my parents that.
Imagine there's a bunch of...
They read the book and said, what was this? We didn't hear it.
I bet you there's a bunch of things you didn't tell your parents. And I should note, to people listening, that all of this is just written with in vivid detail. I mean, even more vivid detail than Levi is conveying there right now, and you're telling the story awesome. But
Thank you.
it's the breakout, the kind of, I guess, migrant shelter, but not really. It's almost like a detention center, but
Yeah.
it's really an auto shop.
Yeah.
Like all of these things
Yes.
are just relayed in the pages of Border Hacker. And so how do you think all of this, like what you're revealing now, is what connects to the fact that you're getting some threats now?
Yeah, absolutely. So we really focus on 4 migrant activists who are very prominent in Mexico. One is Irineo Mujica. Another, of course, the most famous is Father Alejandro Sololinde. A third is Armando Vilchis. And the fourth is someone who we call the attorney, who's also under Sololinde's humanitarian network umbrella. And for various reasons, but mainly because our publishers, our own publisher's attorney said, let's not name her. Yeah, we basically uncover this human rights scandal, deep exploitation of migrants for the explicit financial benefit of migrant activists in Mexico. People who make a name off saying that they're helping migrants. It became clear to us that it was much more complicated than that. And so right as the book was coming out, I received a death threat. I don't think I can say who. I have my suspicions about who it is, but whoever it is was incredibly angry that this book was coming out. They explicitly said that they were threatening us because the book was coming out, and they threatened to kill my co-author Axel and leave his body in pieces in the trash, is what they said, which is a common means of killing people by cartels in Mexico. So the inference here was that they had cartel connections. They also mentioned that the patron, the cartel boss, had been informed of our shitty little book. And so the implication was clear that this is a powerful person who didn't like what was coming out in the book, who has cartel connections and wants Axel dead. And after we received that death threat, I reported it all to the Committee to Protect Journalists. And I've been coordinating now with them to try to keep myself safe and keep Axel safe. Various resources have been apportioned to us. I can't exactly talk about what Axel's situation is for his own safety, but I now have a police patrol stationed outside of my house. I had a book launch, and I had to have a police detail accompany me to the book launch. It's not for nothing either, because after we received that threat, not long after, someone phished me, which phishing is a kind of hacking. It's they send you a picture or a link. If you click on it, that gives them automatic access to your device. So I unfortunately, this is the great irony. I'm writing about a hacker. I'm in all this hacking stuff, and then I get hacked myself. I fall for the easiest thing in the world. It doesn't matter, but I had been talking with some other migrants, and I was expecting some pictures from them, and then this strange number. Clicked the picture, boom, done. And immediately I thought, I think I've been phished. And within 2 minutes, Axel called me, and he said, I just got the strange text from a number I don't know. I haven't clicked on it yet. Did you get the same text? And I said, yes, I did. And he said, you've been phished. Take your SIM card out of your phone, throw it away, log out of all your social media accounts. And I've had to now coordinate again with the Committee to Protect Journalists. They've scanned my phone to make sure I'm not still being hacked. But whoever hacked me went through my phone, and the only thing that they did, as far as I'm aware, is went straight to Axel's contact information and then tried to phish him too. And if they had been successful, they would have been able to find his location. And so that tells me, again, that most likely it's because of our book. Whoever was hacking me actually wanted to get to Axel. And so it's been very scary, to be honest. And we are fortunate to be working with the Committee to Protect Journalists. They've been very generous with us, and we're staying as safe as we can. But the things that we are exposing in our book, sometimes it's hard to communicate to American audiences. But in Mexico, it is a big deal. These are incredibly powerful people. Father Alejandro Sololinde now, it's well known that after Mexico's new president was elected, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, or AMLO, he was originally, AMLO originally appointed Solalinde to run the Human Rights Commission in Mexico City. But it ended up being because he was a priest, it was unclear constitutionally if he could hold that office or whatever. But he is now perhaps the most powerful unofficial advisor that AMLO has. He advises him on his immigration policies. He advises him on the Southern Border Program. So we have someone who is an incredibly powerful person. Armando Vilches routinely boasted to me that he knew senators in Mexico, that he knew congressmen, that would do him favors. And so these are not just your kind of ordinary average American activists who are on the ground and community leaders. These are people with connections to the very elite of Mexico. And someone is looking for Axel.
How long do you think you'll be in this kind of precautionary?
That's a great question. Right now, the book, we've received this death threat, we received these hacks. But the book has not, because it's written in English, it's just starting to get picked up in Mexico. I've just been contacted by
Is it going to get translated into Spanish?
Oh, I would love it. I don't have anything definitive to say yet, but we are looking for translation, like translators right now and a publication. But we have started to be contacted by these Mexican outlets saying, whoa, what is this story? And it's almost kind of in the beginning, if you hear about it and maybe you don't read English, you think this sounds too fantastic. Like, I must have misunderstood what this book is about. This gringo is running around with this New York deportee and they've suddenly stumbled upon the biggest human rights scandal in however many years in Mexico. And so we're trying to say, yes, we have. Like, this is real. But we're in a very, very strange situation right now in which our US audience doesn't quite understand how big of a story it is in Mexico. And in Mexico, we haven't been able to translate it into Spanish yet. So we're at this interesting moment, but I anticipate that interest will probably pick up here. And if interest picks up, I wouldn't be surprised if we receive more death threats and have to continue to be cautious.
Yeah, so we'll definitely keep an eye on that. And please let us know if we can be of any help
Thank you.
Along those lines. But I wanted to end with one last question for you, and that is another big, what I consider to be a huge theme in the book, and that is the concept of love and the concept of more specifically your love with Axel. You were talking about all the stuff you've been talking about, and then there's this bond between you and Axel that is also this. It's a very strong, powerful narrative thrust through the book, and maybe we could just kind of finish today's part of the interview on that note, and if you could speak to that just a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for asking that question. It's hard when I'm talking about the human rights abuses and things we've uncovered and the hacking. It's hard to also talk about that. Yeah, the way I see this book first and foremost, in a certain sense, is actually as a romance. I wrote it with the structure of a romance. It's a romance between two straight men, and it's platonic, but there is a deep brotherly love, we could say, it's friendship, something deeper than friendship that I try to talk about and write about, why I care so much about Axel. And it was a very strange thing for me in the moment to meet someone who felt so different to me on paper, right? We have this young, white, Southern, I'm originally from a small town in Georgia, kind of academic guy. And then you have this Afro-Latino New York hustler. It's not two people that you think would become best friends. But right from the beginning, Axel and I just shared something. I think part of it was being on this migrant caravan and feeling so out of place and lonely. And I was there for the ride and I was there for the struggle, but I was also different from everyone else. And of course, I spoke Spanish, but Spanish is my second language. And so it's a kind of confusing and alienating time to do something like this for the first time. And so then suddenly to have Axel there with me, who also not only spoke English, but had that cultural sensibility of what is going on? Like, we really bonded very quickly originally, but then it went much, much deeper than that in a way that I can't quite explain. And the only thing I can say is that that is part of how I see the foundation of politics and political demands, is a deep, almost unexplainable bond that you have with others that makes you risk something of yourself for them. And I deeply, deeply believe in that. If there's one message I can get across with this book, is today, in a moment of mass militarization of the US border, mass deportation, mass incarceration and policing in the United States, climate change, we're worried about fascism on the horizon, and everyone is saying, what are we going to do in the US? What are we going to do? It feels so hopeless. It feels so overwhelming. And I don't want to mitigate those things, because it does feel sometimes helpless and overwhelming. But when I'm with Axel, when I was working with Axel, when we're together, it doesn't feel hopeless. You can do something, and that something means sometimes risking something of your own personal safety or your own financial gain, which is very hard in the US, because we're told, well, politics should be safe and you should vote every 4 years, or if you're a really good citizen, you vote in the midterms or whatever. And you, sure, vote. Yeah, absolutely. But if we want to change something as brutal and horrifying as mass deportation, it's not going to come from voting. It's going to come from risking something of ourselves, living our lives with the people who are being locked up, who are being deported, and demanding over and over again that they be listened to, that they be respected, and that they belong in our society. And that is what I want to really get across in my book, and why I feel that love for Axel, and why I'm willing to risk something of myself to do that. And it's not just about me either, right? Because Axel is risking something, he's risking even more of himself. He could be killed for what he's saying about these people. At least I'm white, American, I have some protection. It's much more unlikely that they will kill me than Axel. But Axel's making this demand because he believes in a different kind of world. And I'm so inspired by that and by him. And I think if he's going to do that and he's going to risk something himself, why shouldn't I too? I'm here with him. I stand up alongside him, not for him, but alongside him. And who knows what will happen, but I think we have to do it anyway.
I thank you kindly, Levi Vonk, and thank you again for writing your book, Border Hacker.
Thank you, Todd.
And I just encourage everyone to sit down with this book and read it. It's one of those page-turning books that it's one of those books that's actually very difficult to put down, and it's a book that when you do put it down, you're like, when can I get back to it? I want to get back to the book to keep reading it. So it's very highly recommended, and
thank you.
The Border Chronicle is reported by Todd Miller and Melissa Del Bosque, based in Tucson, Arizona. This interview is edited by me, Brenna May-Torrenalara. If you like what you're hearing, please like us on your favorite podcast platform. It really helps others find the show. You can read and listen to more local border reporting on our website, theborderchronicle.com.